Dorothy Miller spent her life cultivating the land, but her biggest dream was always to serve food with love. When she opened her restaurant, she believed she had achieved everything. She just didn't expect that a powerful threat would try to destroy all she had built. Will tastes of home survive? The aroma of freshly baked homemade bread filled the air of the small kitchen, while Dorothy Miller adjusted her floral apron for the third time that morning. Her hands, calloused from working the land, now trembled slightly while organizing the final details for the inauguration of her restaurant, Tastes of Home. Every element of the environment had been carefully chosen. The red and white, checkered tablecloths, the lace curtains made by her late mother, and the flower vases filled with blooms from her own organic garden. At 65, Dorothy was fulfilling her biggest dream. After decades of growing organic food on her small farm on the outskirts of Green Valley, she finally had her own restaurant. The establishment, though modest, represented the realization of a desire born in childhood when she helped her mother prepare treats to sell at the town market. "Everything's perfect, Miss Dorothy," exclaimed Sarah, her young kitchen assistant, while arranging the last pieces of silverware on the tables. "You'll see, today will be a success." Dorothy smiled, feeling her heart race. The opening was scheduled for noon, and there was already a small line forming outside. All of Green Valley seemed to be buzzing with excitement about the news. After all, it wasn't every day that a restaurant opened serving dishes prepared exclusively with organic ingredients grown in the region. The doorbell chimed, announcing the arrival of her first official customer. It was Mayor Robert Thompson, accompanied by his wife, Elizabeth. "Dorothy, my dear, how proud I am to see you achieving this dream," said Elizabeth, hugging her old friend from youth. Soon the restaurant began to fill up. Neighbors, friends, and curious onlookers occupied the tables, filling the environment with lively conversations and exclamations of approval for each dish that left the kitchen. The signature dish on the menu, a chicken stew with locally harvested herbs from Dorothy's own backyard, drew sighs of satisfaction from the diners. Amidst the general joy, no one initially noticed the arrival of a convoy of luxury cars that parked in front of the establishment. Silence only fell when Gregory Montgomery, a well-known businessman in the region and owner of the largest local fast food chain, Superburger, crossed the main door, followed by a retinue of suited advisors, and his daughter Amber. Gregory was known for his arrogance and the empire he had built in recent years. His restaurants were spread throughout the region, offering fast food at competitive prices. His imposing presence and impeccable Italian suit contrasted with the cozy simplicity of the environment. "So this is the new establishment everyone's talking about," he said, emphasizing the word establishment, with a tone of disdain that didn't go unnoticed. His eyes scanned the place, lingering on the checkered tablecloths and lace curtains with visible disapproval. Dorothy, who had just come out of the kitchen to greet some customers, felt her stomach churn at the sight of Gregory. Even so, she maintained the dignified posture that had always characterized her. "Welcome, Mr. Montgomery. Would you like to try our food?" The businessman let out a dry laugh. "Mrs. Miller, I didn't come here as a customer. I came because, as an experienced businessman in the food industry, I feel obliged to warn you. This type of business has no future. Home-cooked food, organic ingredients, you're at least 3 decades behind." An uncomfortable murmur ran through the room. Amber, who remained a few steps behind her father, seemed embarrassed by the situation. Dorothy, however, remained firm, although her hands trembled slightly. "I respect your opinion, Mr. Montgomery, but I disagree. I believe there will always be room for food made with love and quality ingredients." "Love doesn't pay bills, ma'am," Gregory retorted, his voice rising. "I'll make a public bet. I give this place 3 months before it closes its doors, and do you know why? Because people want convenience, speed. Nobody has time to sit and wait for food made with love." The entire restaurant was silent now, witnessing the embarrassing scene. Elizabeth, the mayor's wife, stood up to defend her friend, but Dorothy made a gentle gesture, asking her to remain seated. "Mr. Montgomery," Dorothy began, her voice calm but firm, "I appreciate your concern, but I prefer to let time and my customers decide the future of my restaurant. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Gregory adjusted his tie, visibly irritated by the elderly woman's serene response. "Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Let's go, Amber," he ordered, turning to leave. His daughter, however, hesitated for a moment, casting an apologetic look at Dorothy before following her father. As soon as the door closed behind the Montgomerys, a heavy silence hung in the air for a few seconds. It was broken by Old Joe, one of the local farmers who supplied some ingredients to the restaurant. "Miss Dorothy, you're a warrior, and you can count on us." A wave of applause and expressions of support filled the room. Customers stood up to hug Dorothy, promising to return and bring more people. Mayor Robert made a point of publicly declaring his support for the establishment. Dorothy thanked them emotionally, but her mind was already occupied with the challenges ahead. She knew Gregory Montgomery's reputation well, and knew that this visit was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. As she returned to the kitchen, where Sarah waited for her with worried eyes, Dorothy took a deep breath and tightened the knot on her apron. "Let's continue our work," she said, more to herself than to her assistant. "After all, we have customers to feed." The rest of the day passed without further incidents, but Dorothy couldn't stop thinking about Gregory's words. At night, after closing the restaurant and tallying the accounts for the first day, which, despite the setback, had been a success, she sat on the porch of her house, contemplating the stars as she had done since she was a girl. The cool night breeze swayed the leaves of her garden, bringing the scent of the herbs she cultivated with such care. There, surrounded by the aromas of the earth she loved so much, Dorothy made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would fight with all her strength to keep her dream alive. 3 days after the health inspector's visit, Dorothy was organizing documents to apply for a loan when she heard hesitant knocks on the restaurant's back door. It was Amber Montgomery, Gregory's daughter, looking nervous and constantly glancing over her shoulder. "Mrs. Miller, I need to talk to you. It's important," Amber whispered, quickly entering when Dorothy opened the door. Her hands trembled as she held a black folder. "What happened, child? You're pale," exclaimed Dorothy, leading the young woman to the small back room where she did the accounting. Amber took a deep breath before starting. "I came because I can't stand to see the injustices my father is committing anymore. You need to know the truth." With trembling fingers, Amber opened the folder and began spreading documents on the table. "My father isn't playing fair. He has an expansion project for Superburger and wants to build a mega store exactly in this block. That's why he needs you to give up the restaurant." Dorothy felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "The plague in your garden. It was sabotage. I found invoices for a banned agricultural product in my father's office, and the complaint to the health department, all set up by him." As she spoke, Amber showed printed emails, receipts, and even photos that proved her words. "But there's more, Mrs. Miller. Jorge Taylor, he works for my father." Dorothy sank into the chair, stunned. "Jorge? But he said he came from Chicago." "It's all a lie. He's my father's front man in several businesses. The franchise idea is a trap. As soon as you sign the contract, they'll take full control of the restaurant and then close it, claiming economic infeasibility." Dorothy ran her hands over her face, trying to absorb all that information. "Why are you telling me this, Amber?" The young woman wiped away a tear. "Because I'm tired of seeing my father destroy dreams for money. I know how much this restaurant means to you and to the town. Besides," she hesitated for a moment, "I discovered that my mother used to frequent your restaurant before she got sick." "Your mother? Helen Montgomery?" "Yes. I found her diary. She wrote about how the food here made her feel at home, how you always had a kind word." Amber smiled. Sadly, she would love to see this place. A heavy silence settled in the small room. Dorothy looked at the documents spread out on the table, her heart divided between gratitude for Amber's revelation and anguish over the discoveries. "There's one more thing," continued Amber, pulling out a final envelope from the folder. "Jorge is going to show up this afternoon with the franchise contract. They know you're desperate because of the health department's requirements. But I have a plan." Dorothy leaned forward, intrigued as Amber explained her idea. As the young woman spoke, a glimmer of hope began to light up in the elderly woman's eyes. That same afternoon, as predicted, Jorge Taylor arrived at the restaurant carrying an expensive leather briefcase and his commercial smile. The establishment was surprisingly empty for that time of day. "Mrs. Miller," he greeted, settling into the table she indicated. "I brought the contract for our partnership. I'm sure you made the right decision." Dorothy served him a cup of coffee before sitting down. Her hands were no longer shaking. "You know, Mr. Taylor, I've been thinking a lot about your proposal these past few days. And you did well," he smiled, pulling a stack of papers from his briefcase. "This contract will change your life." "Of that I have no doubt," Dorothy replied, a serene smile on her lips. "But before we sign, I'd like you to meet some people." As if rehearsed, at that exact moment, the restaurant door opened. Mayor Robert Thompson entered, accompanied by 2 police officers and a district attorney. Right behind them came Amber Montgomery. Jorge stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee cup. "What does this mean?" "It means, Mr. Taylor," said the district attorney, "that you are being investigated for cartel formation and anti-competitive practices. We have enough evidence to indict you and your associates." Jorge's face paled when Amber approached, carrying the black folder with the evidence. "You," he pointed at her, furious, "your father will—" "My father will have to answer for his own actions," Amber interrupted firmly. "Enough of destroying other people's dreams." As the police escorted Jorge out, Dorothy watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. The mayor approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this fight, Dorothy. The town hall will help you with the reforms required by the health department. After all, your restaurant is already a heritage of Green Valley." Amber, who had remained silent, finally approached Dorothy. "Mrs. Miller, I know it doesn't make up for everything that happened, but I want to help. I studied gastronomy and restaurant management in college, if you'll allow me." Dorothy hugged the young woman, emotional. "Of course I allow it, my child. Your mother would be proud of you." That night, after everything had calmed down, Dorothy returned to her garden. Among the damaged plants, small green shoots were beginning to emerge, proving that even after destruction, life always finds a way to start over. 6 months passed since the revelations that changed the fate of Tastes of Home. The restaurant, now fully renovated thanks to community support, shone like never before. The garden had been recovered and expanded, also occupying a neighboring plot of land ceded by the town hall for a community garden project. The partnership between Dorothy and Amber had transformed the place into a reference point, not only for exceptional food, but also for its social initiatives. Twice a week they offered free sustainable cooking workshops for the community. The Flavors of the Future project taught local youth about organic agriculture and gastronomy. On a particularly busy morning, as Dorothy supervised lunch production, Sarah rushed into the kitchen. "Mrs. Miller, you need to see this." On the TV installed in the dining room, a live report showed Gregory Montgomery being escorted out of Superburger headquarters. The headline announced, "Businessman removed from presidency after allegations of illegal practices." "Dad tried to convince me to give up on the allegations until the last moment," said Amber, who was watching the scene beside Dorothy. "But some things are more important than money." Dorothy hugged the young woman. In recent months, Amber had become much more than a partner. She was like the daughter she never had. Her presence had brought not only technical knowledge to the business, but also a new energy that infected everyone. "Mrs. Miller," called old Joe, rushing in through the kitchen door. "You won't believe it. I just closed a contract with 3 restaurants in Chicago. They'll buy our organic produce regularly." The news couldn't be better. The success of Tastes of Home had inspired other local farmers to unite in a cooperative led by old Joe to supply organic food to restaurants across the country. "See?" smiled Dorothy, adjusting the floral apron that had become her trademark. "In the end, we proved that there is room for food made with love." In the afternoon, an even bigger surprise awaited Dorothy. Elizabeth, the mayor's wife, arrived bringing a group of journalists. "My friend, I've come to bring wonderful news. Tastes of Home has been chosen as one of the 10 best traditional food restaurants in America." The room exploded in applause. Customers stood up to hug Dorothy, who couldn't hold back tears of emotion. Amber quickly organized a small celebration, serving the famous cornbread she had learned to make from Dorothy herself. "There's one more thing," continued Elizabeth. "After the initial commotion passed, the town hall has decided to declare Tastes of Home as a cultural heritage of Green Valley. Your restaurant is now officially part of our town's history." Dorothy looked around, her heart overflowing with gratitude. The restaurant was packed, as it always was at lunchtime. At the tables, families and friends shared not just meals, but moments of true connection. The aroma of fresh herbs and homemade bread filled the air, mixing with laughter and lively conversations. In the kitchen, a new group of young apprentices was dedicated to mastering traditional recipes under Amber's supervision. Outside, the community garden flourished, proving that the roots of goodness are deeper than any attempt at destruction. "You know, Amber," said Dorothy as they watched the restaurant's movement at the end of that special day, "sometimes I think your father did us a favor without meaning to." "How so, Mrs. Miller?" "If he hadn't tried to destroy us, maybe we would never have discovered our true strength. Sometimes you need to face a storm to appreciate the sun that comes after." Amber smiled, understanding the wisdom of those words. "You're right. And speaking of sun," she pointed to the window, where the sunset was tinting the sky of Green Valley with shades of orange and pink. "How about we make that coffee with cornbread to celebrate?" Dorothy nodded, happy. Her dream had not only survived, it had transformed into something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Tastes of Home was no longer just a restaurant, but a symbol of resistance, unity, and living proof that with love, dedication, and honesty, it's possible to overcome any challenge.